Anime. 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 Anime over the last few years has seen a pretty meteoric rise in popularity into the mainstream, whether it's a slice of life, a riveting sports anime, or just two shonen protagonists beating the absolute piss out of one another. But you see, there's one genre of anime and manga in particular that I am a fan of, a genre that I think really doesn't get enough love compared to the many other genres of manga and anime, and that, my friends, is horror manga and anime. Well, I should say that is, until now. Hello everyone, I'm Finn. Welcome back to Finn Films. Join me today as I'm discussing what I think might be the best horror, the scariest horror anime ever made. The 5-year project and anime adaptation of one of manga horror icon Junji Ito's best works, Uzumaki. No, not that Uzumaki. I'm talking about this Uzumaki. For the uneducated out there, Junji Ito is regarded by many as the horror icon, the horror goat in Japanese horror manga. And with panels like these ones, to me, it's very easy to see why. Junji Ito is regarded by many manga fans as the king of the horror manga genre, with a particular focus on body horror. Ito has this very specific art style, this way of drawing that, in my opinion, can literally make anything horrifying. Of course, many of his most famous examples of this are like these grotesque, mind-bending horror-type panels, but to me, a lot of his most scariest, his most horrifying panels are the way that he draws the reactions to this body horror by everyday people. Manga horror is this really kind of funny thing, because I think a lot of people don't actually realize just how terrifying a drawn work of media can be. When it comes to on-screen horror, such as horror in shows or movies, it makes a lot more sense. You have this tension building, this building of the music, of the setting, combined with the actor's ability, and then you throw in some jump scares, maybe some special effects, some really good plot lines, and you got yourself a horror movie classic. With something like manga or something like books and novels, though, it's a lot more subtle. It requires a lot more work on the reader's part, but in many ways, I think this is what makes horror in these genres so effective, especially when done well. It kind of reminds me of the first time that I read Stephen King's It. I never really realized just how scary words on a page could be, and how your imagination can just run wild with these horror works, these novels, until I read the works of Stephen King, specifically It. And the same goes with horror art and horror manga, specifically in the works of Junji Ito. However, bringing these works of Junji Ito onto an animated screen has proved throughout the years to be a bit challenging. A few years back, Netflix released the Junji Ito Horror Collection, an anthology, a collection of Ito's kind of short horror stories all brought together, brought to life in an animated screen on an anime format, and it was rather polarizing. Well, personally, I didn't really have too much of a problem with the anime, this anime adaptation at the time. A lot of the hardcore Ito fan base did, and I think that a lot of their critiques were pretty valid, specifically in the animation style that they went for with this Netflix adaptation. This animation style being a classic anime style of animation, which I really don't think does kind of proper service to the real works of horror in Junji Ito's manga. However, this has all changed with the recent release of the 4-part miniseries adapting what might be my favorite of all of Junji Ito's works, Uzumaki. Now, hilariously, a lot of anime fans out there thought that this was going to be some sort of Naruto anime special or something, because Naruto Uzumaki, that's his name, and man, I bet they were in for a bit of a shock. Uzumaki in Japanese means spiral, and the story of Ito's Uzumaki covers the descent into madness of a small Japanese coastal town at the hands of these strange spiral-like patterns, and it fucking slaps. Before we get into the content of episode 1, just a little discretion warning. This is a horror anime that we are talking about, so there's going to be some kind of scary, horrific themes that we are discussing, so just consider yourself warned. As well, if you'd like to help support me and support the channel, please consider like, commenting, and subscribing, as that is the easiest way to help support me, and it does help put these videos into the algorithm. Our story follows a young girl named Kiri, a Japanese schoolgirl and teenager who lives in a small coastal town of Kurozucho. Our story begins with Kiri meeting her boyfriend Shuichi at the train station. The two walk the streets together as Shuichi suddenly asks Kiri if she would ever consider leaving the town with him, as he says a bunch of strange things have been happening within this town. Shuichi comments on these odd whirlpool-like patterns that have begun forming in small streams and rivers throughout the city, as the strange swirling, spiraling wind blows through the couple's hair. Shuichi tells Kiri that this town is driving his father insane, and he has been acting very strange lately, not going into work and spending most of his days alone in his study, enamored by these strange spiral patterns, or Uzumaki. We learn that his father has become completely enamored by these spirals, and is unable to function without them in his daily life. Suddenly though, Shuichi's story is interrupted by the blaring siren of the 5 p.m. bell. Fun fact, most cities in Japan have some sort of like a sound that plays at 5 p.m. as kind of a general indicator of the workday coming to an end. More often than not, this is like some kind of a song that is independent and different throughout every city in Japan, but here in this small coastal town of our story, it's a blaring siren. Shuichi believes that this town is driving him mad, along with many people within the town, the insidious mountains to the looming lighthouse and the rolling seas. That this town is somehow alive. It has been taken over by these spirals. It is riling him up, causing himself to spiral, when suddenly a whirlwind rolls through and Shuichi is gone. It's actually funny because I've talked about this before on the channel, but I actually lived in Japan for a little over a year in a coastal hot springs town called Beppu, a small city. And a lot of kind of what Shuichi is describing here in this town in the story of Uzumaki reminds me a lot of Beppu, the city that I lived in. Well, I guess minus the creepy spirals, of course. Kiri heads home to find Shuichi's father speaking to her own father in their house. Kiri's father is an artisan, a man who crafts pottery, specifically on a pottery wheel, a craft that in itself embodies these spirals. We watch as Shuichi's father employs Kiri's father to build him a spiral piece of art, and tells him how he finds something deeply enigmatic about these spirals, and how there is a wondrous power deep within them that infinitely swirls, enamoring him. I mean, there is very much a reason why spirals have kind of become synonymous with like hypnotists, and we see here how Ito is really kind of playing into this idea, this infinite swirl, this infinite kind of void that is the spiral. We flash over to Shuichi in school the next day, speaking to her friend Izami, a pretty high school girl who all of the boys in their class are completely obsessed with. We learn that Izami has a scar on her forehead hidden by her bangs, a scar that she tells Kiri she got when she was young and trying to impress a boy that she had a crush on. Azami tells Kiri that ever since she got this scar, every boy that she encounters now has a crush on her, these boys becoming completely enamored with her, almost drawn to her, and she jokes that maybe it's this scar that makes them attracted to her. Next, we see Azami and Kiri walk to the local station to meet her boyfriend Shuichi. We see that all of the boys that they encountered again are completely enamored with Azami, but not Shuichi, who responds to seeing her like this.
Ah! Good God! It's hideous, but beautiful in an ugly way, but mostly hideous. Ugh.
In a panic, he runs off, taking Kiri with her, leaving Izami completely stunned. He tells Kiri that he could feel the power of the spiral emanating off Izami, a power that lures and draws young men around her to her, sucking them deep within its infinite swirl, its infinite void. Kiri returns home where her father asks her to deliver the commissioned art piece over to Shuichi's father. She does so, but to her surprise, Shuichi's father says he does not need it anymore. Shuichi's father saying that in fact he can now manifest spirals himself, as he hits her with what might be my favorite scene in this entire episode, where he grotesquely skins his tongue, wrapping it up in a spiral. Kiri screams in horror, dropping the art piece and running out of the house as she passes by a man carrying a strange large circular piece on his back, which we learn he is delivering to Shuichi's father. We flash over to Shuichi, who has run into Azami. Azami tells him that he is the only guy who has rejected her, as we see Shuichi stumbling to the ground in complete fear of her, as he demands to know what Azami is hiding on her forehead. She pulls back her bangs, revealing not the small little scar that we saw in the scenes prior, but a strange spiral-like pattern, her scar having grown larger. Shuichi begs her to leave the town before things continue to get worse, but she refuses, as she has now grown obsessed with this young man, who seemingly she has no power over, as he runs away from her in complete fear. In the next scene, we see a funeral ceremony for Shuichi's father, as we watch smoke billow out from the chimney as his body is cremated. We learn that everyone believes that his father has died in a tragic accident, falling down a set of stairs, but this is a lie. The truth is something far more horrifying. Shuichi tells Kiri that his father had gone completely mad from these spirals, and that one day when his mother and him returned home, their house was completely empty. Empty except for a strange new circular tub, which was standing alone in a room. Within that tub was Shuichi's dad, who had turned himself into a grotesque spiral, stuffing himself inside. Suddenly, people at the funeral cry out in shock, as overhead they see the smoke from the funeral pile has crafted into a strange spiral-like pattern into the sky, as a strange tornado begins to start funneling down from the sky to the pond below. Shuichi's mother cries out, screaming in fear and horror as she begins begging her husband to stop, as we pan to the sky, seeing a strange formation that seems to form into his father's face, this tornado-like smoke emanating from its mouth. As his mother continues to cry, these cries slowly shifting into what seems like a maddening laugh. Next, we see Azami meet with Kiri in the town when suddenly a gust of spiraled wind blows back Azami's hair, revealing a horrifying spiral-like hole that has now burrowed itself into Azami's forehead. Next, we see Shuichi's mother has been taken to a local hospital where she is wailing in horror, as everywhere she looks, she sees these maddening spirals. Next, we see Azami stopped by one of these boys who is obsessed with her, a boy who tells her that he will do anything for her, that something about her is forever drawing him deeper to her in a maddening like spiral that he cannot seemingly escape. We move over to Kiri in class the next day as we see rain pouring down outside. The class is suddenly interrupted by a soaking wet strange boy, a slow-talking, slow-moving boy named Katayama. Katayama gets bullied in class by this asshole student who says if he ran a race with a snail, he would put his money on the snail. Something is incredibly wrong with Katayama. He seems to move and speak incredibly slowly, angering the boy in the class, who then bullies him again after their gym class, stripping him naked and pushing him out into the hallway in front of everyone, trying to embarrass him, when suddenly, to our horror, we see a strange spiral-like pattern forming on Katayama's back. This is a really famous scene from the Uzumaki manga. Katayama is kind of known in the fandom as the snail boy, a boy who not only moves slowly but speaks slowly like a snail. And what do snails have on their backs? A shell in the form of a spiral. Back over at the hospital, we see that Shuichi's mother has further kind of descended into madness as her head is shaved and her hands are bandaged. We learn that the sight of any spiral completely sends his mother into this maddening state, so much so that she has cut her own hair off and has also cut her own fingerprints off to avoid the spirals on her own body, as every spiral that she sees triggers the memory of them finding their dad's horrified body, the horrified spiraled body in the wooden tub. Later that night, Kiri again runs into Azami in the streets. Azami tells her that something is wrong, that her right eye can't seem to focus, as she takes off her hat, revealing the horrific spiral on her forehead has now grown into this maddening spiraling hole, as we watch her eye get sucked into it. We flash over to Shuichi, who is speaking with the obsessive boy that we saw earlier alone in this park. We learn that Azami told him to bring Shuichi there on the promise that she would become his his girlfriend, but she was just lying to him in order to speak to Shuichi, who she has grown obsessed with. In anger, the boy rips off Azami's hat, revealing that the spiral on her head has now grown so large it encompasses much of her face. Out of nowhere, it sucks him inside, swallowing him alive in this, again, strange, very Junji Ito, like body horror type fashion. Azami's own spiral completely encompassing her as it begins to suck herself, eating herself alive until there is nothing left. As in the final shot of the episode, we see a slow zoom on the stained spiral of a shell. The spiral of the shell of a snail. Now, I'm being completely serious when I say this. This honestly might be the best horror anime I've ever seen, and it really does seem like we've finally seen the amazing drawings, the amazing artwork of Junji Ito finally brought to life and done justice in an animated format. A large part of this, in my opinion, is due to the animation style and the painstaking effort that went into creating this anime, the anime of Uzumaki. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this project has been in works for like 5 years now, and I think you can really tell by the truly great quality of the animation style of this anime. Much of this animation was done using a technique called rotoscoping, which is an animation technique where animators trace lines over live action motion picture frame by frame, giving characters in rotoscoped animation a much more kind of live-like, much more smooth feeling whenever they move on screen. I actually recently talked a bit about rotoscoping and this technique in another video that I made not that long ago, a video over the hilarious, wacky, weird Lord of the Rings animated film from the late 70s, and I highly recommend checking that video out because it's freaking wild. So yes, a lot of these scenes from the anime Uzumaki were actually acted out with real actors and then rotoscope painstakingly frame by frame into an animated form, and I think that this is very much what makes Uzumaki like hit so much better than like the Netflix Junji Ito anthology series. Again, trying to capture the feeling that the manga, Junji Ito's manga, into an animated screen is very difficult, but I think that they really managed to do it justice here, and I think that a big part of this is this rotoscoping technique and how it captures how these characters move. A lot of the animation and the movements in this show are like kind of painstakingly slow at times. Characters move incredibly slow. There's this very eerie like feeling whenever you watch characters interact with one another, whenever you watch them walk, whenever you watch them move. It's almost ethereal in the way that the characters move, in the way that the setting around the characters seems to move with them, this further kind of accentuating the horror feeling that this manga is trying to convey. As well, I think that they absolutely nailed the pacing of this show. Fans of the manga will know that they've made several changes to the story of the manga Uzumaki into the animated adaptation, specifically in the order of the events that happen. In the manga, much of the events of Uzumaki are a lot more drawn out. Again, it is a pretty decent length manga, but in order to create a 4-episode special, kind of 4-episode series of this entire manga, naturally they were going to have to, shuffle a lot of these events around in order to get the pacing right, and I think that they absolutely nailed it. On the bright side, every episode of this 4-episode series is set to run longer and longer, with episodes 3 and 4 somewhere around the 40-minute mark. And to me, if the rest of the series is anything like what we saw in episode 1, I think that this will hands down be one of the best horror anime ever made, and more importantly, I think it will finally be a worthy anime adaptation for who I think is the GOAT of the manga horror space, Junji Ito. This anime was probably the anime that I was most looking forward to for Fall Anime 2024, which has a host of great anime upcoming. I did a whole video going over all of the good upcoming shows for Fall Anime 2024, so make sure you go check that out. But with spooky season here, I have to say that so far I have not been let down at all by this amazing work, by this amazing adaptation. Again, I'm a big big horror fan and a big fan of Junji Ito, so I probably would have enjoyed it regardless, even if it wasn't this good. But I am super thrilled to say that this really did feel, to me at least, like a proper adaptation of Junji Ito's manga works, from the fantastic voice acting to the absolutely amazing music score to the perfect rotoscoping anime style. I truly think that this is the horror work of Junji Ito brought onto life into the animated screen, and it really does do it justice. And I'm absolutely loving it. Only a man like Junji Ito could somehow turn something as simple as a spiral pattern into a magnificently terrifying display of body horror. And I cannot wait until we get to see the rest of this anime series. As always though, guys, with these videos, these are just my thoughts and opinions, so feel free to let me know yours in the comment section down below. If you did enjoy this video, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, as that is the easiest way to help support me, and it really does go a long way in putting these videos into the algorithm. As well, if you enjoyed this video, then why don't you check out some of my other content, some of my other anime content on screen now. As always, guys, I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you again for watching my video and continue to support me. Until next time, stay safe out there. Peace, love, Adu.